Every time that I think about why did I did a PhD, I remember the first chapter of Blackface, White Masks of Frantz Fanon. And then the second chapter about the relationship of the Negro with language. There, at the beginning of all this, there was an incredible need from me to prove value. As a black woman from Puerto Rico and from working class families, I needed to prove that my passion, which is learning, had a place in the world, and also that it can be of value. All of a sudden, the passion that was learning became it became a little bit twisted with this hurt, this pain of marginalization. But then it gave me the skills I needed in order to research well enough to be able to reconstruct those worlds that were lost because of lack of value and lack of presence and invisibilization and so on. So it was a perfect thing, all of a sudden that I had the training to do research and end up writing historical novels, which is what I do, a recuperation of stories that happen but remain untold, but not only to reconstruct them in a very objective way, but to bring them to life through fiction. So I've written 4 historical novels: Fendis Fras, La amante de Gardel, Nuestra Señora de la Noche, Sirena Selena Vestida de Pena, among them, in which I recuperate the memory. I get back, I try to go back to specific moments of development in the Caribbean, especially in modern Caribbean. I'm not saying contemporary, but modern Caribbean, and the emergence of this thing called people from African descent in Latin America as a whole, which is another story. It has worked well. I really like teaching. For me, the body is sacred. And I'm really glad that we don't get sold anymore. Not as women, that we were sold as women. There's many other places in the world where it still happens. Many other streets in the world that we live in which that happens every day. Women have to sell themselves in order to survive, and little tiny women get sold into marriage, and for me, that body that is sacred is being used in the most disgusting way possible, which is to create wealth for other person. And also, as black bodies get sold. So that is really interesting when you think it that way, that if you can come back, if you can take the body and make it signify what it has always was meant to say, which is the possibility that energy can flow in a particular vessel and act on reality and create new things by interaction with reality, then that really interests me. So that's the way in which I think of the body. And then the body manifests itself also in many ways that take categories that make it act on the political. Identity, for instance, race, gender, for instance, transgender, for instance, interbinary identities, immigrant bodies. They're just bodies, but all of a sudden, because society creates these particular inclusions and exclusions, the body becomes a text. And the texture of the hair or the color of the skin or the width of the lips have meaning. So it is very important for me to look back at the body and rescue the body from morality, for instance, from the politics, from economics, and maybe it's just because I believe in freedom. The Caribbean has never acted very well with national frontiers. It doesn't work that way. Actually, most of the poverty and most of the problems that we have right now in the Caribbean is precisely because we don't think of it as a region. And I think that that doesn't is not exclusive to the Caribbean, because we tend to do that also with the planet. We think of it in terms of nations, when the planet is not divided into nations. Frontiers and nationalities are completely a device of our imagination. They're made up. They're imagined communities, to quote Benedict Anderson, and it's fine. I think that human beings, we tend to be tribal, and we need to create and to work in society, in groups, and that is okay. I'm fine with that. The problem is when you start applying rules of exclusion that do what is happening right now in many places in the world, like Italy refusing to take boats of immigrants that are dying at sea, or the separation of families of immigrants in the border and in many other places in the States, or the killing of Guatemalans and Hondurans and Salvadorians in Mexico so they will not cross the border towards the state, or presidents of again Guatemala signing in the name of the country and in the name of the nation very corrupt and shady acuerdos. I don't know how to say that in English. Papers in order to prevent further immigrations. It's disgusting that things can move more freely than people. It is very difficult to determine identities, especially national identities in the Caribbean. There is a discourse of national identities in the Caribbean that has worked very badly for us. And all sorts of dictators and dictatorships have perpetuated themselves towards using this language of and discourse of nationality in defense of the homeland. The Caribbean is just like the world, but because it's so little, there's more sea than land. That fluidity is with us almost every day, and the consciousness of fluidity is really important for us. We even walk fluidly. There is very few spaces in which expression can happen in an experimental way, not in a directed, in a pyramidally directed way. You can talk about this, but not about that. You can talk up to this point. You have 30 seconds in order to cover this issue, and my friend Laura said that she gave me the example of Central Park. She said, well, Central Park, what do you think? Is it public or is it private? And she told me 60% of Central Park is paid by the neighbors of Central Park. And those people created a collaborative, or a club, I don't know how to call it, and they pay for the maintenance of the park. But of course, if you live in front of the park, you are interested that certain activities happen in your front yard and not others. Shakespeare in the Park is a good activity, but a Rumba the day of the Puerto Rican parade, no, not that much. They're too loud. And it's only one day. For one day we can have them here and around here, but not anymore. So spaces that we thought were public, that the public sphere, like Habermas imagined it, it happens in the web or in art. So when those two combine, very powerful things happen, and also in the streets. So El Festival de la Palabra is a place in which I take these kinds of discussions to the streets. We have been doing it for 10 years. We move 16,000 students, and only students from kindergarten to 12th grade, to meet writers, to talk to writers, to meet with Esmeralda Santiago, to meet with Alain Bambicou that we brought from Guinea Equatorial or from France, to meet with people that they would never meet, and ask them questions and read their books after they meet the person. It's a person-to-person transmission of knowledge. And we try to do it as unpretentious as we can. If there is pretentious intellectuals or writers, they can only come once. But we want to recreate this experience of sitting next to fire and telling stories to each other and sharing knowledge around the issues of knowledge. I am, knowledge saved my life and gave me a purpose. And I have had a wonderful life. If I've ever would sit down and imagine the life that I have, I would have never come up with it. I mean, it's magical. I cannot believe I'm in it. And I want to stay for a long time. But because of that, I want to share that love with knowledge that drives most of us. And of course, competitions and scholarships, they mess it up. They mess this incredible love that we have. And that's what Festival de la Palabra is. Very little people and very big people together, telling stories and asking questions. And then going to books, they are like the repository. They're so beautiful. Books are so beautiful, such a beautiful device. They're a very understated repository of the knowledge of the world. That's not a computer. You cannot read anything in a computer like you can read it in a book. It's much more intimate. You can take it with you. So that's what we do. And I really like it. It's a lot of work, and our country has changed. Therefore, we're going to step back and rethink it, and then we're going to go at it again. Writers are agitators and dreamers. That's what we are. You see, we've always had this incredible job, which is imagining what is possible so that it can become possible. It's like a magician that conjures a reality. And people say, you're just talking poetry, but no, I'm being completely objective. Margaret Shrimpton, a friend of mine she's from Great Britain, but she teaches at the University of Yucatan. She says that in the Caribbean, literature always antecede, comes first or arrives first than history. Literature always tells what's going on before historians then go and get the data, which is so elusive and is always lost in some weird places, and the archives are not properly identified and classified, and it takes a long time to get the information in many places that are not powerful because that information is not valued. So poets and writers tell that story before it can be confirmed. And I would say that is true in the Caribbean and in many other places, that memory is something that is very important in our places. But also I would say that we dream the future. We say, this is possible. This is another world that is possible. And we agitate. We make it very uncomfortable for you to relinquish your power of imagination to what you think is possible. And society needs that. I get very frustrated when people think of literature and art as entertainment or as luxury, because it's completely, incredibly essential. Um, Harriet Tubman said something wonderful that I always remember, which is that she said, "I freed hundreds of slaves, but I would have freed more if they knew there were slaves." See, the new part is what writers work with. If you not understand it in terms of information, but if you experience the knowledge, then you can free yourself. And that is our role in the world. I used to be a very organized and very project driven person. Very. So much that I was always like tense. But I've grown older. Knowledge comes from this slow distillation of experience mixed with information. Um, that is, with formation. And and I used to be very, very, very plan driven. But right now, I think that since I have gotten to the privilege of looking backwards and seeing 27 books and many, many mistakes, but some good things, I am going to stand still for a while, and I am going to let life tells me where to go next. And also, but I also want to see if I don't plan it that much, what will happen. I want creativity to come back and shape and shift the plans that I have. Because after working for 2 years in the recovery of Puerto Rico, um, I worked very, very closely with NGOs, with nonprofit organizations, in order to create shelters and safe havens for reading. And we worked with post traumatic stress disorder, and we worked with suicides, many, many, many suicides in Puerto Rico for like 8 months. There was one suicide every 1.5 days. And we also had to collect data and do all sorts of just surveys, and in order to survive. Who needs what, and do you have the right insulin, and why are you failing math again, and why can't you stay still? There was incredible amount of instability, especially emotional instability. There still is in Puerto Rico. So after that experience, and we survived it. I think that life, it tends to be. I've become very spiritual and in peace with the world, and one of the things that I have learned is that it'll take you to where you need to be. Life will take you to where you need to be, to where you're most needed, and I'm game.